Hello, and we're back with another conversation in biblical psychology. And I'm Elizabeth Jones,
Hey, I'm Calvin Kaplan.
and this is another conversation. And what this conversation is going to be centering on, Cal, you spoke about Eric Wellish in one of our previous conversations, and about his call for a biblical psychology. And in the historical frame of reference, when you were plotting the beginnings of your ideas on biblical psychology, you wanted to find a different, a different concentration to consider when we were looking at a basic conflict in life. Instead of Oedipus, you wanted to look at Abraham and Isaac, which was a suggestion of Eric Wellish.
Yeah.
Could you tell me a little bit more about that?
Well, the entire psychoanalytic movement, and Freud himself saw the Oedipal configuration, Oedipal conflict, as invariant, as universal. And the whole gang of anthropologists, from Margaret Mead, Ruth Benjamin, all argued, they went from island to island, arguing it was a universal concept or phenomenon. But it really, from a culture and personality point of view, it comes out of the Greek way of looking at life, and what we've already talked about in a previous conversation regarding the creation stories, that the father-son conflict is immutable. So the very idea that the Oedipus conflict begins with, Elias hears that his son, should he reach man's estate, will murder him and marry his mother, is a view which is very, very alien to the biblical view, which argues that the child, each generation is a link in the chain, and basically in Hebrew idea, be dor lador, from generation to generation, and each generation is the child of the generation before and the parent of the generation after. And this is very different than the Greek view, where each generation begins anew, and each generation is in conflict with the other generations.
Now, Cal, you wanted to take a look at at Abraham and Isaac, and you reached some very different conclusions, logically speaking, when you looked at Abraham and Isaac.
Well,
Tell me about that.
I think the biblical conception of circumcision, penile circumcision, was a neutralization and a sanctification, a replacement of the fear of castration. The castration was Freud's idea of how the Oedipus complex is resolved and how the son identifies with the father. He's afraid the son's going to castrate. He's afraid the father's going to castrate him. Therefore, he gives up the mother as a libidinal object choice and identifies with the father. But for psychoanalysis, this is the basis of the superego, or conscience. And the basis of the superego is fear. In the biblical world, the idea is that the son shall go beyond the father, and therefore circumcision becomes the penile circumcision, becomes the way in which God and the father and the son emerge to have this idea of the covenant going from father to son, and God puts his stamp of approval on this. So therefore the father now sees the son not as a rival, but as an apprentice or a student, and the son sees the father not as a block, but as a teacher.
So the father and son are not in conflict.
No, they're not.
They're absolutely
They're
not.
in cooperation.
They're in cooperation and harmony with each other.
Now, that means that the resolution of this Akeda resolution, if there's still a superego or conscience emerging out of that, it's not going to be based out of fear the way it is in the Greek account, but it's going to be based out of a covenant of love. And this is a whole different way of looking at parent-child relationships than that emerging from the Greek world. And this is what we're trying to do and bring it into psychology.
Absolutely. And so the idea of a harmonious relationship, which is very common in what we talk about in the biblical narratives and in biblical psychology, is much more prevalent in the biblical accounts than in the Greek accounts.
Yes, because there isn't the inherent conflict. One generation is not in opposition to the previous generation.
Now, it's not to say that there is no conflict in the biblical narratives, because there is. There is some conflict.
But the conflict usually is which son's going to inherit the covenant.
Well, yes.
Not the sons against the father.
And the conflict has the possibility of becoming resolved.
Yes.
And that is absolutely
Because
different from the Greek.
You're right, because the biblical family is purposeful, to quote our friend Rick Warren, and the Greek family is purposeless. So in a purposeless situation, it's kind of a nihilistic attack, and you're just trying to keep from being devoured or being, which is the Greek father does to his kids. In the biblical account, the fight is usually between siblings to see who's going to inherit the covenant. Totally different. There's something to inherit.
So that sounds like a good place to end this particular conversation, and we'll be back with more on the father and son relationship later.
How did that go, you think?